Grit progression. That's what we're going to talk about now. The most common question that we get is, how far do I need to go with my sandpaper? And that's an excellent question, especially for the beginner or intermediate guy that just doesn't have any idea. So first of all, we want to talk about the basic grit. So this is an 80 grit, and this is very, very rough. And then it gets finer and finer to this Festool granite paper. This is 1000 grit, and really this almost just feels like a piece of paper. It doesn't feel like any grit whatsoever, where this is very coarse. So people always get frustrated because they're spending a lot of time sanding and they don't really know when to stop. And you'd be surprised about when you can actually stop. So typically the rule of thumb and what most people will tell you is on raw wood, stop at 150 grit. And I would agree with that. That's a good place to stop. You don't want to spend a lot of time. Anything past that is to actually sand the wood once you get some finish on it. So you're actually sanding the finish and not the wood. And you'd be surprised about just how smooth that you can get it. So I have this door here, right? And this is a factory made door. And I knew a fellow that sold Amish furniture that made oak cabinets just like this, and chairs, tables, and stuff like that. And I was asking him about the process of finishing, and he told me that they don't finish their doors past 100 grit. So this door right here, which is pretty common of what's going to be hanging up with in your house, was only finished to 100 grit. But if you run your fingers across it, it's incredibly smooth. So that was a really eye-opening experience for me. And then just 2 weeks ago, I was over at my friend Shelby the Woodman's house. Follow him on Facebook, he's a character. And he was doing some experiments, and he ran a piece of wood through his 36 grit belt sander and then sprayed some post-catalyzed polyurethane on it. And that was smooth as glass. So that was another eye-opening experience. People think that you need to get the wood smooth to have a smooth finish, but you're actually going to get the finish smooth. Okay, the problem with going past 150 grit sandpaper is what you're actually doing at that point is you're burnishing the wood. So even though the wood will look shiny, you're not actually sanding it, you're compressing the fibers. And that causes problems with the finish sticking to it. So if you ever notice a finish that's peeling up, it's typically because the person sanded way too far. So 150 grit is as far as you want to go. If you want to be stubborn, you can go to 220, but I definitely wouldn't recommend going past that. Now, once you have some finish on the wood, that's when you want to go to your higher grits. And you can go all the way to 2000 if you want. But just keep in mind to work your way through the grits just like you would on the raw wood, and save yourself some time and enjoy the experience. Another question that we get is, where should you start with sandpaper? And that's an excellent question, and it's very different depending on what your application is. You always want to start as high as possible, because remember, in the previous video, I talked about how the sandpaper puts scratches. So you want to minimize the scratches as much as possible. But in some cases, you'll have to use some really rough sandpaper. So if you're shaping some wood, or you're starting with a rough piece of wood, you're gonna need to start with like a 60 or 80 grit. But if you have a piece that's fresh out of the planer, you have sharp blades in your planer, you don't necessarily need to go down to 80, and you're really wasting your time, and you're gonna spend a lot of time sanding those 80 grit scratches out. So I think 120 is a good place to start. If that works for you, you can continue on from there. If it doesn't work, then you can drop down to an 80 grit.